Claire Whitman stared at her screen, frozen. The email had gone out 3 minutes ago. Her personal Christmas wish list, the one meant for her sister, had just landed in the inboxes of every employee in her department. All of them now knew what their CEO wished for, to be seen as something more than untouchable, to be chosen instead of feared, to have one evening that wasn't about quarterly reports. She hit recall. Too late. The room fell silent in that specific way that meant everyone had already read it. Then footsteps approached her desk. A voice, low and steady, cut through the quiet. "Tell me your real wish." Ryan Mitchell stood there, his expression unreadable. Not mocking, not pitying, just waiting. Claire's instinct was to shut him down immediately. She had built her career on control, on keeping a measured distance between herself and everyone who worked under her. That distance was what made her effective. It was what kept the whispers at bay when she'd been promoted at 30. It was what allowed her to walk into boardrooms full of men twice her age and hold her ground. Ryan Mitchell wasn't supposed to break that distance with a single question. He wasn't supposed to look at her like he'd just seen something no one else had noticed. She opened her mouth to tell him to go back to his desk, to pretend this hadn't happened, to let her salvage what was left of her dignity. But the words caught in her throat. There was something in his eyes that wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. She forced her voice to stay level, professional. "I don't know what you're talking about. That email was a mistake. Please return to your work." Ryan didn't move. He wasn't defiant, exactly. Just still. "I think you do know," he said quietly. "And I think that's what scares you." The rest of the office had gone back to pretending nothing had happened. Keyboards clicked, phones buzzed, someone laughed too loudly at something on their screen. Claire could feel the weight of their avoidance, the way they were all working very hard not to look at her. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to rewind the last 10 minutes and double-check the recipient field before hitting send. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. The gesture was meant to create distance, to remind him, and herself, who was in charge. "Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your concern, but this is not a conversation we need to have. If you'll excuse me, I have work to finish before the holiday." He nodded once, as if he'd expected that response. But before he turned to leave, he said one more thing. "For what it's worth, I don't think there's anything wrong with wanting to be seen." Then he walked away, back to his desk in the corner by the window, and Claire was left alone with the echo of his words. The rest of the day passed in a fog. Claire answered emails, approved budget revisions, sat through a conference call about Q1 projections. But her mind kept drifting back to the wish list. She hadn't even remembered writing it. It must have been late one night, after too much wine and too many hours scrolling through social media feeds full of people who seemed to have lives outside of work. She'd written it as a joke, really. A way to vent without actually saying anything out loud. She'd meant to send it to her sister, who would have laughed and told her to get a hobby or download a dating app. But instead, she'd sent it to her entire team. And now they all knew. They knew she was lonely. They knew she wanted more than the corner office and the title on her business cards. By the time the office started emptying out for the evening, Claire was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. She watched through her glass walls as people packed up their things, pulling on coats and scarves, talking about holiday plans. Ryan was one of the last to leave. He didn't look at her as he passed, but she found herself watching him anyway. She'd worked with him for 2 years and realized she knew almost nothing about him. He was quiet, efficient, never late with a report. He kept a photo on his desk of a little girl with dark curls and a gap-toothed smile. That was all she knew. Well, That and the fact that he'd just asked her a question no one else had dared to ask. Claire stayed late, as she always did. The office was quieter at night, easier to think. She pulled up the wish list on her screen and read it again, cringing at how raw it sounded. She thought about deleting it, but what was the point? Everyone had already seen it. The damage was done. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister. "Mom wants to know if you're coming for Christmas dinner." I told her probably not. Claire didn't reply. She couldn't remember the last time she'd gone home for the holidays. There was always too much work, always a reason to stay behind. She stood up and grabbed her coat. Enough. She needed to go home, pour herself a glass of wine, and forget this day had ever happened. The next morning, Claire arrived at the office early, hoping to avoid the awkwardness of running into anyone who might want to talk about the email. She made it to her desk without incident and immediately buried herself in work. But at 8:45, there was a knock on her door. She looked up and saw Ryan standing there, his expression as unreadable as it had been the day before. "Do you have a minute?" he asked. Claire gestured to the chair across from her desk, keeping her face neutral. "What can I do for you?" Ryan sat down, folding his hands in his lap. He looked uncomfortable, like he'd rehearsed this conversation in his head and was now regretting it. "I wanted to apologize," he said. "For yesterday. I shouldn't have said what I said. It was out of line." Claire blinked. That wasn't what she'd expected. "It's fine," she said, though it wasn't, not really. Ryan shook his head. "It's not fine. You're my boss. I shouldn't have put you in that position." He looked down at his hands, then back up at her. I read that list, and I recognized it, the things you wrote. They're the same things I used to wish for after my wife died. So I thought maybe you might want to talk about it, but I was wrong. I'm sorry." Claire felt something shift in her chest. She hadn't known he was a widower. She hadn't known anything about his life outside of this office. And now, here he was, sitting across from her, offering her something she hadn't realized she needed. Understanding. The professional part of her brain was screaming at her to end this conversation, to send him back to his desk. But another part of her, the part that had written that stupid wish list in the first place, wanted to keep talking. "You don't need to apologize," she said. "I'm the one who should be apologizing. That email was unprofessional. It won't happen again." Ryan looked at her for a long moment, and she had the unsettling feeling that he could see right through her carefully constructed armor. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Claire nodded, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear the question. "Do you actually want it not to happen again?" he asked. "Or do you just think that's what you're supposed to say?" The question landed like a punch. Claire opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. Because the truth was, she didn't know. She didn't know what she wanted anymore. Ryan stood up, sensing that he'd pushed far enough. "I should let you get ready for your meeting," he said. "But if you ever do want to talk, I'm around." He left before she could say anything else, and Claire was alone again, with the question hanging in the air. "Do you actually want it not to happen again?" She didn't have an answer. Not yet. That night, lying in bed, she pulled out her phone and opened a new note. She stared at the blank screen for a long time before she started typing. "What do I actually want?" She didn't write an answer. Not yet. But the question was there, waiting for her to be brave enough to face it. Claire spent the weekend trying not to think about Ryan's question. But Sunday night, lying in bed with her phone glowing in the dark, she found herself scrolling back through her work contacts until she landed on his name. She stared at it for a long time before locking her phone and setting it on the nightstand. This was ridiculous. He was an employee. She was his boss. Whatever moment had passed between them in her office was Just that. A moment. Nothing more. Monday morning brought a project deadline that required her full attention. It wasn't until late afternoon that she realized she hadn't seen Ryan all day. She told herself it didn't matter, but when she walked past his desk and saw it empty, something in her chest tightened. At 5:30, there was a knock on her door. She looked up and saw him standing there, dressed in jeans and a jacket instead of his usual work clothes. It threw her for a second. She'd never seen him in anything but business casual, and the change made him seem like a different person. More real, somehow. "I need to leave early tomorrow," Ryan said, stepping into her office. "There's a Christmas performance at my daughter's school. I was hoping I could make up the hours later in the week." Claire nodded, already pulling up the calendar on her screen. "That's fine. Just send me an email to confirm." Ryan didn't leave. He stood there, shifting his weight slightly, like he was deciding whether to say something else. Claire glanced up at him, waiting. The silence stretched between them. Finally, he spoke. "Can I ask you something?" he said. His voice was quieter than usual, careful in a way that made her nervous. "Go ahead," Claire said, though she wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. Ryan looked down at his hands, then back at her. "That list you sent, the one about wanting to be seen. Did you mean it?" Claire felt her defenses rising instinctively. She could deflect, make a joke, remind him that it was none of his business. But something in his expression stopped her. He wasn't asking out of curiosity or pity. He was asking because he wanted to know. "I don't know," she said finally. The honesty surprised her. "I think I meant it when I wrote it, but I didn't expect anyone else to read it. So maybe I didn't really mean it, or maybe I just wasn't ready for anyone to know." Ryan nodded slowly. "I asked you that question the other day, not because I was trying to embarrass you," he said. "I asked because I recognized what you wrote. After my wife died, I used to make lists like that. Things I wanted but didn't think I was allowed to want anymore. Things that felt selfish because I had a daughter to take care of and a job to keep. It took me a long time to realize that wanting those things didn't make me weak. It just made me human." Claire felt something shift in the air between them. Ryan wasn't letting her hide behind that distance anymore. He was standing there, offering her permission to be something other than perfect. "I don't know what I want," she admitted. The words came out quieter than she intended. "I've focused so long on the next goal, the next promotion, the next thing I need to accomplish. I don't think I've ever stopped to ask myself if any of it actually makes me happy." Ryan leaned against the edge of her desk. "That sounds exhausting," he said simply. Claire laughed, a short, bitter sound. "It is, but it's also safe. If I keep moving forward, I don't have to think about what I'm leaving behind." Ryan looked at her for a long moment. "Maybe the problem isn't that you don't know what you want," he said. "Maybe it's that you haven't given yourself permission to want anything that doesn't fit into the life you've built." The words landed hard. Claire opened her mouth to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but she couldn't. Because he wasn't wrong. "I should let you get back to work," Ryan said, straightening up. But before he left, he added, "If you ever want to talk about it, I'm around. No judgment. Just someone who gets it." He left before she could respond, and Claire sat there in the silence of her office, feeling like something fundamental had just shifted. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire found herself noticing Ryan in ways she hadn't before. The way he always made time to talk to people when they stopped by his desk, even when he was clearly busy. The way he kept a photo of his daughter facing outward, like he wanted everyone to know she was the most important thing in his life. The way he never seemed to need to prove himself, never seemed to be chasing the next promotion or approval. They started texting. It began innocuously enough, a question about a project deadline, a clarification on a budget line item. But then the messages started coming later in the evening, after work hours. Ryan would send her a link to an article he thought she'd find interesting. Claire would reply with a comment about something funny that had happened in a meeting. The conversations were light, surface level, but they were also the most honest interactions Claire had had with anyone in months. One night, she was working late when her phone buzzed. It was Ryan. Still at the office? She looked around at the empty floor, the dark windows reflecting her own tired face back at her. Unfortunately, a minute later, another message came through. "Me too. Conference room B if you want company." Claire grabbed her laptop and headed toward the conference room. Ryan was sitting at the long table, his laptop open in front of him, a half-empty cup of coffee beside him. He looked up when she walked in and gestured to the chair across from him. "Figured we might as well be miserable together." Claire sat down, setting her laptop on the table. "What are you working on?" "Year-end reports," Ryan said, grimacing. "You?" "The same," Claire said. "Plus budget projections for Q1. It's thrilling stuff." Ryan smiled, and the expression transformed his face. She'd never really noticed before how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was genuinely amused. "We really know how to live, don't we?" They worked in comfortable silence for a while. Claire found herself glancing up at him more often than she should have, noticing small things. The way he chewed on his bottom lip when he was concentrating. The way he ran his hand through his hair when he was frustrated. Around 9, Ryan closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Can I ask you something?" Claire looked up, her fingers stilling on the keyboard. "Sure." "That wish list," Ryan said. "The one you accidentally sent. What was the thing you wanted most?" Claire felt her throat tighten. But Ryan was looking at her with that same steady, patient expression, like he had all the time in the world to wait for her answer. "I think," Claire said slowly, "I wanted someone to see me as more than what I do, more than my job title or my accomplishments. I wanted someone to look at me and choose me, not because of what I could offer them professionally, but just because they wanted to." Ryan nodded, his expression thoughtful. "That's not a small thing to want." "No," Claire agreed. "But it feels selfish. Like I should be grateful for what I have instead of wishing for more." Ryan shook his head. "Wanting to be seen isn't selfish. It's human. We all want that. The problem is most of us are too scared to admit it." Claire looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something crack open inside her chest. "Is that why you asked me? Because you wanted me to admit it?" "No," Ryan said quietly. "I asked because I wanted you to know you weren't alone in wanting it." The air between them shifted, growing heavier with something Claire couldn't quite name. Before she could find the words, Ryan stood up and started packing his laptop. "I should get home," he said. "My daughter's with the sitter, and I try not to leave her too late." Claire nodded. "How old is she?" 6, Ryan said, and his whole face softened when he talked about her. "She's the reason I keep going, you know? After my wife died, I didn't think I'd ever feel okay again. But watching her grow up, seeing her laugh and learn new things, it reminds me that life keeps moving forward, even when you're not sure you want it to." Claire felt something twist in her chest. "She's lucky to have you," she said. Ryan smiled. "I'm the lucky one." He left, and Claire sat alone in the conference room, staring at her laptop screen without really seeing it. Something had changed tonight. She couldn't name it yet, couldn't fully understand what it meant. But she knew, with a certainty that terrified her, that she didn't want to go back to the way things had been before. The texts became more frequent after that night. Ryan would send her a photo of something his daughter had drawn, and Claire would find herself smiling at her phone in the middle of a meeting. She'd send him a sarcastic comment about a particularly tedious conference call, and he'd reply with something that made her laugh out loud. It was easy talking to him, easier than it should have been, but easy didn't mean safe. Claire was acutely aware of the line they were tiptoeing around, the unspoken question hanging between them every time they exchanged messages. She told herself it was just a friendship, that she was reading too much into his kindness. But late at night, when she was alone in her apartment, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her in the conference room. In the 3 weeks following the wishlist incident, everything changed. Claire was in a meeting with her team when she noticed Sarah, one of the senior associates, staring at her phone with a smirk. When the meeting ended, Sarah lingered behind, waiting until everyone else had left before approaching Claire's desk. "So," Sarah said, her tone light but pointed, "you and Ryan seem pretty close lately." Claire's stomach dropped. She kept her expression neutral, refusing to give Sarah the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. "I'm not sure what you mean." Sarah tilted her head, her smile widening. "Oh, come on. Everyone's noticed. The late-night work sessions, the constant texting. I saw you two in the elevator last week, laughing about something. It's cute, really. I just hope you're being careful." Claire felt her jaw tighten. "Careful about what?" "About appearances," Sarah said, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You know how people talk. And Ryan's a single dad, so I'm sure he appreciates the mentorship. But you wouldn't want anyone to get the wrong idea." Claire wanted to snap at her, to tell her to mind her own business. But she couldn't, because Sarah was right. People were talking, and the more Claire thought about it, the more she realized how dangerous this was becoming. She was Ryan's boss. If anyone thought she was showing him favoritism, it could destroy both of their reputations. After Sarah left, Claire sat at her desk, staring at her phone. She had 3 unread messages from Ryan, all of them mundane: a question about a project timeline, a comment about the weather, a photo of his daughter's holiday art project. She read them over and over, feeling the weight of what Sarah had said pressing down on her chest. This couldn't continue. She knew that. But the thought of cutting Ryan off, of going back to the way things had been before, felt like losing something she hadn't realized she needed. That night, Claire's phone rang. It was her boss, the executive director. He wanted to see her first thing in the morning. No explanation, just a request for a meeting. Claire's stomach churned as she hung up. She knew what this was about. She stayed up most of the night, turning the problem over in her mind. By the time the sun came up, Claire had made her decision. She was going to end it. Not because she wanted to, but because it was the only way to protect both of them. Ryan had a daughter to think about, a life that depended on the stability of his job. She sent Ryan a message before she left for the office. "We need to talk." His reply came almost immediately. "Okay. When?" Claire stared at the screen. "After work. My office." She didn't wait for his response. She grabbed her coat and left, walking into the cold December morning with the weight of what she was about to do pressing down on her shoulders. The meeting with her boss went exactly as she'd expected. He didn't accuse her of anything directly, but he made it clear that there had been concerns raised about her conduct with a subordinate. He reminded her of the company's policies on workplace relationships, on maintaining professional boundaries. He said he trusted her judgment, but he wanted to make sure she understood the potential consequences if those boundaries were crossed. Claire sat through the entire conversation with her spine rigid, her expression carefully blank. When it was over, she thanked him for his time and walked back to her office, feeling like she'd just been punched in the gut. At 6 o'clock, Ryan knocked on her door. He looked tired, like he'd been worrying about this conversation all day. Claire gestured for him to sit down, but she couldn't meet his eyes. If she looked at him, she'd lose her nerve. "I can't do this anymore," she said, her voice flat. "Whatever this is between us, it has to stop." Ryan didn't say anything for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "Why?" Claire forced herself to look at him. Because people are talking. Because my boss called me in this morning to remind me about workplace relationship policies. Because if we keep doing this, it's going to hurt both of us. Ryan leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. So that's it? You're just going to cut me off? I don't have a choice, Claire said. You have a daughter. You need this job. I can't be the reason you lose it. Ryan stood up, and for a second she thought he was going to argue with her. But instead, he just nodded. You're right, he said. You can't be the reason. But that doesn't mean you have to be the one who ends it. He left before she could ask him what he meant, and Claire sat alone in her office, feeling like she'd just made the worst mistake of her life. The next week was the longest of Claire's life. She threw herself into work with the kind of intensity that used to make her feel powerful, but now just made her feel hollow. She avoided Ryan in the hallways, kept their interactions strictly professional in meetings, and archived their text thread so she wouldn't be tempted to reach out late at night. It should have been easy. She'd spent her entire career keeping people at arm's length. This shouldn't have been any different. But it was different. Every time she walked past his desk and saw him focused on his screen, every time she heard his voice in a conference call, something in her chest twisted. Safe had started to feel a lot like empty. On Thursday afternoon, an email landed in her inbox. The subject line read, "Transfer request." Claire's hand froze on her mouse. She didn't need to open it to know what it said, but she clicked anyway, her heart pounding in her ears. Ryan Mitchell was requesting a transfer to a different department, effective at the start of the new year. The reason listed was vague, seeking new opportunities for professional growth. But Claire knew better. He was leaving because of her. She read the email 3 times, her chest growing tighter with each pass. This was what she'd wanted, wasn't it? Distance. A clean break. But sitting there in her office, staring at those cold, formal sentences, Claire realized she'd already lost him. And the pain of that loss was worse than anything she'd been trying to avoid. She closed her laptop and left the office early for the first time in years, walking through the city streets without a destination in mind. The holiday decorations seemed to mock her, all those twinkling lights and cheerful displays, all those people rushing around with shopping bags and smiles. Everyone seemed to have somewhere to go, someone to be with. Claire had told herself for so long that she didn't need that her career was enough. But standing there on the corner of 5th and Madison, watching couples walk past hand in hand, she felt the full weight of her loneliness. She pulled out her phone and opened her messages. Ryan's last text was still there, from 3 days ago. "Hope you're doing okay." She'd never replied. She'd told herself it was better that way, cleaner. But now, staring at those 4 words, she realized how much courage it must have taken him to send them. He'd known she was pushing him away, and he'd reached out anyway. And she'd been too much of a coward to respond. Claire's fingers moved before her brain could catch up. "I'm sorry," she typed, and hit send before she could change her mind. The reply came faster than she expected. "For what?" Claire stood there on the sidewalk, people streaming past her on both sides, and tried to put into words what she was sorry for. Sorry for being scared. Sorry for pushing him away. Sorry for choosing the safety of her career over the possibility of something real. But all of that felt too big, too complicated to fit into a text message. So instead, she wrote, "For not being brave enough to answer your question." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, Ryan's response came through. "What's your real wish, Claire?" She stared at the words, her vision blurring slightly. He was asking her again, giving her another chance to be honest. And this time, standing alone in the cold with nothing left to lose, she knew what her answer was. "You," she typed. My real wish is you. They agreed to meet the next evening. Ryan suggested a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office, neutral territory where neither of them had the advantage. Ryan was already there when Claire arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups in front of him. He'd ordered her usual, black coffee with 1 sugar, and the small gesture made her throat tight. She slid into the seat across from him, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was different now, heavier with everything they hadn't said. Finally, Ryan leaned forward, his expression serious. "I put in for the transfer because I thought it would be easier for you," he said quietly. "I didn't want you to feel like you had to choose between your career and whatever this is. But I need you to know something. When I asked you what your real wish was, I wasn't trying to make things complicated. I was trying to tell you that I saw you. The real you. Not the CEO, not the woman who has everything figured out, just you." Claire felt something break open inside her chest. Ryan had seen through all of that. He'd looked at her and seen the loneliness she'd been trying so hard to hide. And instead of judging her for it, he'd offered her understanding. "I'm terrified," Claire admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've worked so hard to get where I am, and I know that if people find out about us, they're going to say I'm showing you favoritism. They're going to question every decision I make. They're going to think I'm weak." Ryan reached across the table and took her hand. The contact was startling in its simplicity, just his fingers wrapped around hers, warm and steady. "You're not weak," he said firmly. "You're human. And there's nothing wrong with wanting something for yourself instead of just for your career." Claire looked down at their joined hands, feeling the weight of his words settle over her. She'd believed for so long that wanting anything beyond professional success was a sign of failure, that admitting she was lonely meant admitting she wasn't strong enough to handle her own life. But sitting here with Ryan, feeling the warmth of his hand in hers, she realized how exhausting it had been to carry that belief, how much it had cost her. "I don't know how to do this," Claire said, looking up at him. "I don't know how to be with someone and still be good at my job. I don't know how to let people see me as anything other than what I've always been." Ryan squeezed her hand gently. "Then we'll figure it out together. But you have to stop pushing me away every time things get hard. I lost my wife 3 years ago, Claire. I know what it's like to be scared of losing someone again, but I also know that hiding from that fear doesn't make it go away. It just makes you lonely." Claire felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She'd cried maybe twice in the last 5 years, both times alone in her apartment after particularly brutal work weeks. But sitting here with Ryan, hearing him talk about his own fear and loss, she felt something inside her give way. "I sent that wish list by accident," Claire said, her voice shaking slightly. "But everything on it was true. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be chosen. And when you asked me about it, I was terrified because I knew you actually saw me. Not the version of me I show everyone else, but the real me. The one who's lonely and tired and doesn't have all the answers." Ryan nodded slowly. "And that's the version I want to know. Not the CEO. Just Claire." The simplicity of his words undid her. Claire felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly, embarrassed. But Ryan didn't look away. He just sat there, holding her hand, waiting for her to be ready. "I'm going to send an email," Claire said finally. "To HR and to my boss. I'm going to tell them about us. And I'm going to propose that you report directly to someone else so there's no conflict of interest. It's not going to be easy, and people are still going to talk. But I'd rather deal with that than lose you, because I was too scared to try." Ryan's expression softened. "Are you sure? Because once you do that, there's no taking it back." Claire nodded. "I'm sure. For the first time in a long time, I'm actually sure about something that has nothing to do with quarterly earnings or market projections." Ryan smiled, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. "Okay then. But I need you to know something. My daughter asked me last week why I'd been sad. I told her I'd lost something important, and she said I should go find it instead of just being sad about it. She's 6 years old, and she already understands something it took me years to figure out. If we're going to do this, we do it right. No hiding, no pretending it's something it's not. Because I'm not just choosing you, Claire. I'm choosing to build something real with you. And that means being honest about what we want." Claire felt something shift inside her, like a door she'd kept locked for years finally swinging open. "My real wish," Claire said softly, "is to stop being afraid of what I want. And what I want is you. Not just the late-night texts or the secret conversations. I want the real thing, even if it's messy, even if it scares me." Ryan stood up, still holding her hand, and pulled her to her feet. For a moment, they just stood there in the middle of the coffee shop, the noise and bustle of the city fading into the background. Then he leaned in and kissed her, gentle and careful, like he was giving her one more chance to change her mind. But Claire didn't pull away. She kissed him back, feeling the fear and doubt and loneliness that had weighed her down for so long finally start to lift. When they broke apart, Ryan rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to be okay," he said quietly. And for the first time in years, Claire believed it. The email Claire sent the next morning was straightforward and professional. She disclosed her relationship with Ryan to HR and her boss, proposed a new reporting structure to avoid any conflicts of interest, and committed to maintaining the highest standards of professionalism. The response came back within 2 days, a meeting scheduled for the following Monday morning to discuss the logistics. It wasn't approval exactly, but it wasn't a denial either. It was a chance. And that was more than Claire had expected. The office gossip was inevitable. Claire heard the whispers in the break room, saw the way people looked at her differently in meetings. But she'd worried for so long about what people thought of her that she'd forgotten how little their opinions actually mattered. The only opinion that counted was her own. And for the first time in her career, she was making a choice based on what she wanted, not what she thought she should want. Ryan transferred to a different department as planned, but not because they were hiding, because it was the right thing to do, the professional thing. He reported to a different supervisor, worked on different projects. But they still had lunch together once a week, still texted each other ridiculous observations about office politics, still met up after work to walk through the city and talk about everything and nothing. It wasn't easy. There were days when Claire second-guessed herself, when the weight of people's judgment felt too heavy to carry. But every time she started to spiral, Ryan was there, reminding her that choosing happiness wasn't the same as choosing weakness. That letting someone in didn't mean losing herself. That being seen, really seen, was worth the risk. 1 year later, on Christmas Eve, Claire stood in Ryan's apartment, watching him hang stockings over the fireplace, while his daughter directed him with the serious authority of a 7-year-old. The apartment was small and cluttered in a way that Claire's pristine condo had never been, full of toys and books and photos and life. It should have felt chaotic, but instead, it felt like home. Ryan's daughter ran over to Claire, holding up a drawing she'd just finished. "I made this for you. It's us at the Christmas market." Claire looked down at the crayon drawing. 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a Christmas tree, 1 tall, 1 medium, 1 small. Her throat tightened. She'd believed for so long that success meant climbing higher, achieving more, proving herself over and over. But looking at this drawing, at the simple joy of 3 people choosing to be together, she realized that maybe success was something entirely different. "It's beautiful," Claire said, crouching down to the little girl's level. "Thank you." The girl beamed and ran off to show her father, leaving Claire alone for a moment. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app, finding the wish list she'd written the year before, the one that had started all of this. She read through it one more time, the desperate longing to be seen, to be chosen, to matter to someone beyond what she could produce or accomplish. Then she opened a new note and stared at the blank screen. Ryan came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "What are you writing?" Claire smiled. "A new wish list." "Yeah? What's on it this year?" Claire tilted her head back to look at him. "Nothing. Because everything I wished for is already here." Ryan laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "That's convenient. Saves you the trouble of accidentally sending it to your entire staff." Claire elbowed him gently, but she was smiling. "You're never going to let me forget that, are you?" "Never," Ryan confirmed. "It's how we met. Or re-met, I guess. I'd been working for you for 2 years, and you barely knew I existed until that email." "That's not true," Claire protested. But even as she said it, she knew he was right. It had taken a humiliating mistake and a simple question to make her see it. "Okay, maybe it's a little true." Ryan turned her around to face him, his expression growing serious. "You know what my wish is this year?" Claire shook her head. "That we never forget how brave we had to be to get here," Ryan said quietly. "Because it would be easy to forget, to let this become normal and comfortable and safe. But I don't want to forget what it felt like when you finally answered my question. When you chose this, even though it scared you." Claire felt tears prick at her eyes, but this time she didn't try to hide them. "I won't forget," she promised, "because choosing you was the first time I chose something for myself instead of for my career. And it changed everything." Ryan kissed her, soft and sweet, and Claire let herself fall into it, into the warmth of his arms, the security of knowing she was chosen, the quiet joy of being seen for exactly who she was. She'd believed for so long that happiness meant achievement, that success was measured in promotions and corner offices and the respect of people who didn't really know her. But standing here in Ryan's messy apartment, surrounded by the comfortable chaos of a life that included more than just work, she realized that true success was something different. It was the courage to want more, the bravery to choose happiness, even when it was complicated, the willingness to be vulnerable enough to let someone see the parts of herself she'd spent years trying to hide. Sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't losing control. It was realizing that happiness came from letting go of the need for perfection and allowing yourself to be chosen, flaws and all. And maybe that was the real wish, not for a life that looked perfect from the outside, but for a life that felt real from the inside.